Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast. I haven't been with you with my podcast in a while, but now we're going to be having more podcasts from the community, from very interesting people around the world. Today, I have a very special guest with me. His name is Ken McCarthy. Ken is an author, and he is also an internet commercialization pioneer. Ken has written many books. He's the author of many books, and we will talk about his books, his previous experience and current experience also in the internet world, everything that we're dealing with now, alongside many interesting things leading to his recent also books that he wrote. Ken, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on. As I told you before, I'm a big fan. I watch your YouTubes at least once a day.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your approach. You approached me and sent me some interesting information, and that led to actually our podcast today. So, Ken, do you want to start off by telling us exactly what it is you do, your background? You're an author. You wrote many very, very interesting books. And the title, Internet Commercialization Pioneer. Do you want to tell our viewers what that means exactly, what that entails, and what is it you do exactly?
Sure. So to place me in time, I'm 65 years old, which means in the 1990s, I was in my 30s. And I lived in San Francisco. And San Francisco was really the birthplace of the commercial internet. And I make the distinction between the commercial internet and the internet because, believe it or not, for the first 20 years of the internet's existence, commercial activity was prohibited. It was originally a pure government, science, military communications channel, and you were not allowed to sell anything. You weren't allowed to have a bake sale or a flea market sale, or I guess in England they call it a bonnet sale. You weren't allowed to talk about any transactions at all. And then in 1989, the government said, okay, now you can do business if you want. But nobody knew how to do business on the internet because everybody who was using the internet was an engineer or an academic. So from 89 to 93, which is quite a bit of time, it's 5 years, not much happened. I was living in San Francisco at the time. I was involved in a method of doing business called direct marketing. So, infomercials, radio commercials, short television spots, direct mail, advertisements in the magazines and newspapers that would compel you to call and order now, that kind of thing. So when I saw the internet, I said, wow, this has the potential to be a great medium for this kind of marketing. And I became very interested in it. And I happened to be the person that organized and sponsored the very first conference ever on the subject of, can we do business on the web? And if we do it, how do we do it? And our guest speaker, our featured speaker, was a young man, then 23, named Mark Andreessen. And if somebody knows the tech world really well, especially the venture capital world, he's now a pretty big venture capital guy, but back then he was 23. And he and an older man had started a company called Netscape. And Netscape was the very first company to sell a browser. So if you're using a browser, and of course you are because everybody is who's on the web, it's because of that guy, that young guy and his partner. And they're originally, it was just 7 guys when I met them. So I'm also credited with being the person that realized how important calculating the click-through rate is. How many people see something versus how many people click on it. And of course, that's the basis of Google's fortune. It's the basis of Facebook's fortune and so on. But it was primitive times. When 1993 started, no one had heard of the World Wide Web for all practical purposes. Nobody. I mean, people had heard of the internet. People were using email, but the web, nobody had heard of it. By the middle of 1995, it was a global sensation. Of course, it's kind of taken over the media world since then. So that's my distant background. And then I always focus on small businesses because that's where my passion is. And we put on conferences for many years. People came from all over the world to learn how to use the web to sell things because nobody knew how. So a lot of the things, maybe some things people find annoying, like, when you sign up for a mailing list and now you get mailing all the time, automatically, we promoted that kind of thing. we promoted the idea of opting in, signing up for a mailing list. That wasn't common on the internet until we did it. So
that was revolutionary at the time.
It was. And my goal was, one, of course, to make a living. But two, I always have this desire to publish. And I know a lot of other people have the desire to publish their research, their analysis, their insight. And in the old days, pre-internet, guys, I mean, maybe some things about our current age are not so great. But in the old days, if you wanted to get published, you had to go and write a check to a big printer to print a minimum of 500 books. Usually it was 1,000, and that was your only way to get your info. Or you could Xerox things and hand them out on the street corner. But the idea that we can have a discussion, you and I can have a discussion like this across the Atlantic, and thousands of people can see it. We can post to the internet our articles. Nothing like that existed pre-1993. So that was my other strong motivation for putting a lot of energy into helping the internet become a commercial medium, so that we could do what we're doing right now today.
Of course, things have changed since that time, and I think the younger generation, to them it's all so natural now.
Yeah.
No one has an idea of how the world is without so many social media platforms having internet access. I mean, I'm younger than yourself in that sense, but I have faced a period in my life where things were not all internet. I mean, at one point we didn't have any computer or anything of the sort, life outside of technology. How do you feel that things have shifted since that time up until this moment?
Well, I have to say that I do think that I think we peaked in positivity, and I do think that the negative impacts, especially of the smartphones and the dopamine-driven social apps like Facebook being one of them, I think they've done real harm to society. This is my calculation. It's one thing to go to your desktop and you're out in the world and you're doing all kinds of things, and you come home and you get on your desktop and you specifically are doing specific tasks on the internet, researching or communicating with friends. But this idea, especially for very young people, to be walking around with the phone attached to their hand forever and be constantly doing this all day long, and for that to be their main source of information, that I don't think is a good trend. And I notice in the States, and I think in the UK too, they're starting to say, look, kids, you can't have your smartphones in school. Yeah, you're not allowed,
Yes.
I think that's very positive. I don't think children and young people should be, I can't even imagine, if when I think back, imagine if I brought a typewriter to class and I was sitting there typing while the teacher was speaking, but because the phone is small and it's quiet, but it's absurd to have to have distraction when you're in school. You should be focusing, and yeah,
absolutely. So, it's not that it's just disturbing. I think it's very poisonous in class. I mean, I think in our social life it can be very harming too. For example, it's like me and you having a conversation now, and it's quite normal for many people nowadays to be sitting having a normal conversation with each other in a restaurant or wherever, and they're constantly on their phone. At one point, I saw 5 late teens, and I'm not saying that it's, by the way, only teens. You don't know, adults do that very frequently, sitting waiting for their meal, and their heads are like this, and it's not normal. It isn't normal, and I think it's good that there are certain steps to prevent that, for example, in schools, because it really doesn't make sense. Initially, if you recall, once the phone started coming in, it wasn't really acceptable for children to have phones in class. Then there was the excuse of, well, what if there's an emergency?
Right.
Or what if we have to communicate some with our parents? And the big question is, like, when was the last time that there was an emergency where you needed to have your phone on you 24/7? You wouldn't really realize that, by the way, until you reach a stage where you decide to take a step and take a move and have any sort of social activity in life without a mobile phone, and realizing that it's possible. Even when you want to go on a trip, even if it's with a family, you can find your way eventually. Most new cars have a sat nav. Even if the car doesn't have a sat nav, inbuilt sat nav, you can either buy one or just follow the signs, really. But I think the most important thing, or thing that's more important than certain policies being taken by, for example, schools or governments, is what people take on an individual basis. So time limiting the the level of usage on our phones, for example, at a personal level or at a family level, if you want to have children, if you have children, for example, and not being afraid of having a ban on unnecessary tech. Because like you said, if I had to do a project for school, if you have to do a project for university or whatever, you can go to your desktop, you can get everything done, and then you are detached, and then you are present. You are present in the area that you're in. Because if I'm talking with Ken now and I have my phone with me and I'm browsing through whatever videos or posts or whatever it is, I'm not entirely with you. I'm present in another place. And out of respect for myself and for you, I need to be present with you. And that's such an interesting subject, like you spoke about the dopamine as well from it. And that's so true, because now recent researchers are showing that children actually are getting addicted. Children are getting
Oh yeah.
addicted to these phones.
Oh, very
And
much.
when they go off them, they have withdrawal symptoms. And that's something extremely serious. And it was an eye-opening watching I think it was a documentary once, The Social Dilemma, if I'm not mistaken, talking about, well, people in these industries, in social media, who were talking about having dopamine rooms, about having, people working on keeping people hooked
Yes.
and addicted to
Yeah.
constant content. And I think it's very important for people to be aware of that, firstly, especially the younger generations who don't know the world without internet,
Hmm.
without social media, without instantly having everything that they want. There's also an element of impatience that gets created because of that, I believe. You all of a sudden you expect everything to come instantly. Either the show that you want to watch, when you used to wait for a show 1 week to come once a week on television
Right.
before, or buy a book or whatever it is, and ordering everything that you want, and immediately having gratification or validation for things that you do. And it's such an important topic, and I'm really glad that we're speaking about this, because even if I want to speak about it from a personal level, like my online and content creation side of things, apart from the other things that I do, it can get you hooked very much on your phone, your mobile. And if you don't have that self-discipline, then you start getting carried away and sinking into this world.
Hmm.
Moving on to your books. I mean, you've written several books. One of them was about the web. Was that book relating to the stuff that we're talking about at the moment, or was it relating to other subjects concerning the web?
It's a memoir, and it's also a history, and it focuses specifically on the transitional years from 1993 to 1995. And that's when the web went from literally nothing to being this big deal. But I do refer to the problem of social media in the book. And you were talking about earlier about people designing the dopamine hits. It's even more sinister than that. They discovered that it was negativity that caused people to get addicted to the phones. Negative images, negative stories, emotionally disturbing things. And they went ahead and deliberately created and fostered and encouraged that kind of content on social media solely to get more views and therefore more advertising opportunities. I want to say this really clearly. This was not our vision in the early 1990s when we wanted to commercialize the internet. All we wanted was for people to be able to publish and for people to be able to find unique information published by other people. Of course, advertising was necessary to support it, but the idea of trying to addict somebody, especially children, to negative states of mind to get them to stay on the phone and keep looking at impressions. Because, of course, that's how internet advertising works. The more impressions you can show a user, the more money you can make, right? But that was never our vision, never our intention. And this was really the Facebook generation, the Mark Zuckerbergs and people like that. So the book is specifically about the innocent years of the internet, of the web, from 1993 to 1995. And my life, and I wrote it for young people in mind. I mean, I wrote it for many different audiences, but I kept always thinking about young people, because I would explain to them that when I grew up, the only technical thing I had to worry about was how to change the ribbon in a typewriter. Like, that was it. I mean, and then maybe I'd have to go to the store and buy a new pencil and get a fresh eraser. That was the only technology we had to communicate. And by the way, we got along fine. We wrote poetry, beautiful poetry. We wrote love letters. We wrote great songs that people are singing. The generations before the internet were very productive with pencil, paper, and typewriters. They didn't, you don't need necessarily every digital bell and whistle in the world to create beautiful things. However, it's lovely to have the platform, but we have to be smart about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the thing. When you write these things, it's so important to write about them. Again, to give these people exposure about how things were and where we are now. Apart from that memoir, you've written a couple of other books as well. Do you want to talk us through about them?
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you why I've started to write and publish books. Is it's a reaction to the digital environment. A lot of positive things about the digital environment, but one of the negative things is, people see something and they get an impression, and then they flip the page or they go to another site, and now they're getting another impression, another impression, another impression. So we're conveying a lot of information, but how much of it is sticking? And the beautiful thing about a book is it's solid. Like, it doesn't, I hand it to you, and it doesn't disappear 5 minutes later. And you can carry it with you, and you can have it by your bedstand. You can read it in the kitchen. You can hand it to a friend. You can mark it up. It's still a marvelous, marvelous technology. And, books were at one point high tech if you went back, several thousand years. So that's the main reason I've started to write books. And so I've been writing books and publishing books in reaction to certain things going on in society. So I was very active in writing about what I'll call it. People might have different opinions, but I called it the COVID con. I talked about it very early when it was first starting. It seemed to me more like an authoritarian imposition. It seemed to be more like a medical coup than a true public health initiative. And that's just my opinion. I realize people have different opinions. So I was writing books about that. You might be interested to know, and this will lead to my second bunch of books, is that this individual, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., was writing a book on Anthony Fauci. And I was very supportive of that book. In fact, I contributed a lot of evidence and research to it. I footnoted 28 times, and I was also involved in marketing it. And then I wrote my own books on the same subject. And I bring him up because I think your viewers know that he has taken an absolutely bizarre, and I'm going to call it perverted, stance in the situation in Palestine. You probably were, I'm sure you're aware of it, right? His position, or maybe it's not universally known.
Fauci.
No, I'm sorry. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Oh, so I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Fauci.
Oh no!
And to be honest with you, of course, yeah, I'm aware of the position of Robert F. Kennedy, and it's unfortunate. But to me, to be honest with you, it wasn't really surprising. It's unfortunate because, well, you have someone from the Kennedys. We all know what happened to all of them, and the level of interference that happened from the deep state in the United States, for someone to come and outright like this, say as if Israel is a strategic place, or this state of it as an aircraft carrier, and his abhorrent, to be honest with you, support, it wasn't really surprising because, see, that's the thing. When you're a Palestinian yourself, you start knowing what to expect from which countries, and everything that's called even international law. And I think the global population is starting to realize all of this, and especially people in the position of power in the United States. That's why even with Trump, for example, despite the fact that he was having a significant base, and you could hear people, for example, backing Donald Trump, when he was having these events, saying genocide Joe, genocide Joe.
Right.
It's as if they are going there to support you, giving you a mandate against someone who's supporting genocide, only for Donald Trump, for then to come and be an even bigger warmonger than him, and Kennedy joining Donald Trump instead of pushing for an alternative, if that makes sense. So it wasn't really surprising, to be honest with you. It's unfortunate, but it wasn't that surprising.
Yeah, well, I can tell you from the American side and people that were aware of his work. I first became of him as a person when he was fighting against pollution, in specifically mercury contamination, which is a huge problem globally. And he was very outspoken about that and very helpful. And he also has been very helpful in children's health issues, and shining a light on the over-vaccination of children. And this is something maybe not, well, probably in the UK it's a problem, but in the rest of the world, I've traveled the world, children do get some vaccinations, but in the United States, they're scheduled to get 80 vaccinations, 80, by the time they're 18.
80.
80. And every day they're coming out with a new one. And part of the reason for that is many years ago, I think under Clinton, the makers of vaccines were given blanket immunity. They have no product liability whatsoever. So if I make a car and I sell it, and the wheels fall off and people get killed, well, I'm in trouble. I'm going to, I'm going to be sued. So that's called, a liability, and people that make things need to be liable, right?
Absolutely.
But the pharmaceutical industry specifically, their vaccine products, they got immunity. So I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the United States, if a child is injured by a vaccine, and some are injured gravely, and the family wants compensation, they cannot go to the manufacturer, even if the manufacturer was negligent, even if they put garbage in, they mismanufactured, they did the wrong thing. You can't go to sue them. You have to sue the United States federal government. And so these poor families with children that have been seriously injured, their family attorney has to go up against the U.S. Department of Justice attorneys. So it's been very unfair. So Kennedy was very courageous in standing up for these families and standing up for the science. And he, his father had a reputation for justice. I think that's one of the reasons he was killed. Yeah. And so it was a disappointment to us who knew him, who knew him pre, that he came out with these awful, horrific statements in support of, basically in support of genocide. So I thought, since I knew him, I thought maybe I can reach him somehow, and I know he's a reader. So the first book I did, this came out in January of 2024. So as soon as the Republic of South Africa filed their complaint against Israel in the World Court, I said, this is amazing. This is great. So we got the documents, the actual complaint. We got all the footnotes. We downloaded everything because, a lot of these things are reference to the internet, but the internet, is constantly changing. So we downloaded everything. So anybody that gets this book can read, they can hold it in their hands, the actual complaint that South Africa made way back in January of 2024. Anybody that says, oh, we don't really know what's happening, and we didn't know it was so bad, we didn't know what, well, wait a minute. There was a complete court case with all evidence presented, and the court came out and said, based on the power we have, and all courts are limited in their power, based on the power that we have, we can immediately call this a likely genocide. We can judge that, and every judge went for it. I think except some crazy judge from Africa. Even the U.S. judge went for it. So we also put the treaty, the international treaty against genocide in this book. We also put the U.S. law against the support of genocide. If you support genocide in the United States and you're convicted of doing that, it is a $1 million fine and potentially 10 years in prison. Right? That, I mean, it's
not many people know that.
That's why we put it. That's why I wanted it in a book. Now, what I've learned about law, and I'm sure you know too, is, it's not as objective and fair as it is on the paper. But the papers, the actual legal papers in the United States say, if you are involved in supporting a genocide, those are the penalties. If you're involved in just inciting, in other words, just saying things, that's a $500,000 fine. So it's a very, very serious crime. So anyway, so we have this South Africa, and I think of the South Africa, and anybody that knows the history, and I do know the history, who was the last country on earth, or the last two countries on earth, to support the apartheid regime in South Africa? Well, it was the United States and Israel, right? And of course, Israel was providing them with weapons, was providing them with electronics, was providing them with apparently the atom bomb. So, of course, South Africa would be motivated to bring this case. And so they went through great effort to write this case. And it's quite a lengthy document, And we have that, all the footnotes, and again, the two relevant laws. We'd like to update it. We'd like to put in the actual court judgment. So people can see that, hey, there was actually a judgment, and we'd like to put in the warrant against Netanyahu and the other miscreant. I forget the guy in Israel. I forget his name. So someday, we have a lot of projects, but that's one of our projects. So my dream, and I was very naive, is that Robert Kennedy, Bobby, we call him Bobby, believe it or not, Bobby, being an attorney, if he saw the case and read it, he'd have to say, oh my goodness, I made a terrible mistake. I mean, people make mistakes in judgment. That's fine. Persist in a mistake. That's the sin, right? So he ignored. Yeah. So he ignored. Now I have his address, and I know that it was delivered because, they take the picture of the book. Yeah. Amazon, when they deliver it. So I know it was on his front door. I also have a colleague who's very close with him. And I sent it to him, and I know that man's also concerned, and he also hand delivered the book to him. So I tried, right? So the next thing I did was Robert Kennedy's always talking about his family. I mean, if my father was, and uncle were who, I would talk about my family too. So he's always talking about his family and his family history. And I wanted to point out to him with some subtlety that he's actually disgracing his family history. And so I wrote this book. And what it is a collection of speeches that John F. Kennedy gave. And very few people know that in the 1950s, long before he was president, when he was, I think, still he was in his 30s. He was a senator from the state of Massachusetts. And you have to remember, 1950s was, Cold War, Russia versus, America, it was a very different environment. And John F. Kennedy was willing to spend political capital, and he got on the floor of Congress and he did two things on two different events. One, he spoke on behalf of freedom of the people of Indochina, because at that time France was waging a war to suppress the people in Indochina. And Kennedy went on and gave a speech and said, this is wrong, we shouldn't be supporting this. That was really a hard thing to do because, World War II was only over about 10 years when he gave that talk. France was our close ally. It was the Red Scare and the Cold War. And you can't possibly say anything that supports anybody that might be socialist or communist. But he did that. And it didn't gain him any political benefit at all. The people in Massachusetts, they're very nice people, but they're not terribly sophisticated about international affairs. They didn't care. They didn't give him extra votes because he supported the people in China. The other group that he supported, with a long speech, well-researched, well-prepared, was the people of Algeria. Because at the time, in the 1950s, the French were massacring the Algerians to an unbelievable, just what we're seeing now today. Just what we're seeing now today. Except,
they were massacring massive amounts of reports of like 40, 50,000 a day, in some cases, over 1 million martyrs in Algeria.
Oh, absolutely. Horrific. Absolutely. And of course, that history, not taught in America, probably not taught in the UK. but that was one of the most horrific events of the post-war era. And John F. Kennedy got on the floor of Congress and he said, "Wrong, bad. We can't support this. We got to stop it." Now, he carried through on that, and hardly anybody knows this. So when he became president, finally de Gaulle said, "Okay, we're done. We're done. We're moving out." And the Algerians had an election, and they elected their first president. So what did John F. Kennedy do? He put on the most, and you can find this on YouTube. Just search around, you'll find the historical footage. He put on the most lavish state affair outdoors at the White House. Red carpets, honor guards from every one of the 5 different military, and not just 3 guys with the flag, like 20 guys from each military. I don't know it's like 36 gun salute, the big official gun salute. He had compelled the Joint Chief of Staff to be there. I mean, all the most important people in the U.S. government were there to recognize and honor this first president from Algeria, right? Nobody knows this story, but it happened, right? So I put this in the book, and I took the speech that Kennedy gave, an excerpt of the speech from the floor of the Congress, and everywhere he said Algerian, I changed it to Palestinian, and everywhere he said French, I changed it to Israel. And you read it, if anybody gets, you'll see it's completely congruent. So the point I wanted to make to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was, your uncle, Bobby, your uncle stood up for justice when there was no benefit to him. Again, in the 1950s, Red Scare, McCarthy. Unfortunately, my name's McCarthy, but they call this thing the McCarthy era. It wasn't me. It wasn't my family. It was another branch. I don't know those guys. Please don't forget on me. It's like having the name Hitler. It's terrible, you know. But it wasn't my family. And the Red Scare and all that. And John F. Kennedy was willing to spend political capital to defend the people of Algeria and then honor them when they won. And that was everything that a president does is symbolic, right? They sit down, he's in one chair and the guy's in the other chair. That's not what Kennedy did. He opened the entire White House and made this the most lavish event you can imagine. You can find it on the web. If you just search, you'll find it. You'll be amazed. You probably have never seen such a lavish White House reception ever. So that was what John F. Kennedy did. So I call the book, I had his speeches, his character and his intentions. Oops, here we go. Revealed in 5 speeches and 1 telegram. The telegram was his telegram to Israel in the summer of 1963, where he told I forget who the guy was then, told him, listen, we know we don't know. We are concerned about what you are doing vis-a-vis atomic weapons development. And we need to go and visit your atomic weapons lab, your atomic research lab. We need to inspect it now. And of course, you know how the Israelis are, well, we can't do it now. It's the wrong season. It's too hot. It's too cold. Come back next Tuesday. They're bullshit. And they were pulling that on him. And finally, he sent them a telegram and he said, look, this is not optional. There will be a major withdrawal of support on the part of the United States if we can't visit your atomic research facility. Now, of course, John F. Kennedy was murdered in the fall of the same year. And then we had a brand new president named Lyndon Baines Johnson, who, by the way, came from a Christian Zionist family. I don't know if people are aware of that. He also had a lot of business partners and fixers around him in Texas who were Zionists. And of course, if you know the history, we had the 1967. We had this. It was the Liberty. It was actually they call it a communication ship. It was actually
that's Liberty.
Yeah, it was actually an NSA spy ship being run under cover of the U.S. Navy. But regardless, people are aware that Israel attacked those sailors, murdered many of them, severely injured others, and that Johnson not only did not defend the ship, he chose, once given the information, to specifically not defend it. And then he told all those men, if you ever mention a word about this incident, you will be court-martialed and imprisoned and possibly worse. And the acceleration of military support. Kennedy gave, quote, defensive military weapons to Israel. Not many, but he gave some. John F. Kennedy. But it was Lyndon Johnson that just opened the doors and gave anything they wanted. So that was the big turning point. So I hope that book would influence Robert Kennedy, but apparently didn't move him.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So I ratcheted up even higher, and then I wrote this book.
Nice. Yeah, you haven't left anything. When you talk about the secret war of JFK against Zionism, what are the highlights in that book?
It's incredible, and all this, by the way, is absolute. We don't guess that things happened. We have the actual letters. We have we have the facsimiles. We have the pictures of the letters. We have the text, of course, but we have the original documents. So nothing in this book is speculative, or maybe this happened, or maybe this was happening. There were two things going on in the summer of 1963. John F. Kennedy, as I mentioned earlier, was really pounding on the doors of the Israeli government and saying, we need to get inside that nuclear power plant. We need to see what you're doing there, because we suspect you possibly might be developing weapons, and that is forbidden. Okay. Just to give people context, there were only 5 countries that had nuclear weapons then: Russia, UK, France, US, and China. Right. And it was a big mission on Kennedy's part to stop nuclear proliferation. And he actually succeeded in what they call a test ban treaty, which was unprecedented at the time. Because at that time, people were, the French were blowing up atom bombs in the open air in Tahiti or in the South Pacific. It was getting out of control. And so he said, look, guys, we got to rein this back. No more open air testing of nuclear weapons. That was John Kennedy. And he got all the countries involved to sign it. His goal, his long-term goal, was to stop new weapons being created. And his final goal was to have the weapons being dismantled. And he was actually working with the Soviets on that. It was going to be a long process, but that was his goal. So the summer of so to put this in context, now we have Israel developing nuclear weapons in 1963, upsetting Kennedy's plans, and also encouraging proliferation. Because once Israel's get it, then now Pakistan needs to get it, and if Pakistan, India has to get it, and if India has it, then this guy has to get it. Next thing you know, everybody's got nuclear bombs, and that was what Kennedy wanted to stop. So that was the first arm. Now, his brother, Bobby Kennedy's father, Robert F. Kennedy, was the Attorney General at the time, and he was fighting the Zionists on the issue of lobbying. Okay, in the United States, it is legal for a foreign country to lobby in the United States, but you have to register. You have to disclose where all your money's coming from. You have to disclose where you're spending the money. And the law is so strict that if, let's say, I'm a paid lobbyist for the state of Zimbabwe or something, and I come and I talk to a congressman and there's an aide there, I have to report the meeting, I have to report who was there, and I have to give a transcript of what was said. And that has to be reported to the State Department. Israel, obviously, I don't know if you're aware of this, Israel somehow, of all the countries on this earth, have managed to evade the foreign lobbying laws of the United States. If you're England, if the UK, you got to do it. If you're Canada, if you're New Zealand, if you're Nigeria, everybody's got to do it. But Israel somehow has evaded that. Robert F. Kennedy was sticking it to them and saying, you have got to register, period. Right? So that was and it was a secret battle, because many of these documents, especially the ones related to the nuclear issue, were classified until the last 5 or 6 years. So this wasn't known. It wasn't known that these two brothers were aware of the dangers of Israel and were taking steps on behalf of the American people and the world to rein that power in. And of course, when John was killed, that upset everything, right? And then of course, Robert was killed 5 years later. So that's what
Mm,
that's what
mm.
this and this Mahmoud. Nobody in the United States knows this history. The other thing that
Unfortunately, because they don't want them to see it. It's like when you talk about the law. You were mentioning
right,
about the law, and you mentioned
right,
the legal elements, banning a United States president, for example, from supporting genocide. Well, the question is, law, is every law implemented? That's one question. The second question is, are there people above the law? That's the second question. And the third question is every person able to conduct a fair legal battle?
yeah,
And the final one is very important, because let's say you know that fact and you want to file a lawsuit against Donald Trump for supporting genocide, for example. That needs deep pockets. That
right,
needs very, very deep pockets.
right,
And usually with legal battles, many of them end before you reach anything even that resembles justice, because if you do have the money, you will silence the other party with money, and in many cases they will take that money. And now we're seeing international law. I think international law is becoming a joke. I think the whole world is now realizing that we're living in a world that is governed only by force. There
mhm,
is no international law. There is ink on paper. There are things that are nice to read. There is the United Nations as an organization, again, a formation of post World War II power division, really, mostly established by the United States as a soft power, in my opinion, with very beautiful things:
mhm,
humanitarian law, international law, human rights, all ink on paper. And in the meantime, the United States is operating as what I like to label as a militaristic oligarchy. They call the enemies of the United States oligarchies. It's the United States that is the militaristic oligarchy, achieving its power and financial gain through global aggression. This is what it means. And they're still trying to do that. And I think more and more people are realizing that. And for some reason, and I find this a little bit absurd, and I'm not sure if it stems out of either weakness or lack of willingness to confront, or even to some extent complicity, but it's as if other countries, well, especially from the oppressed part of the world, they're treating these international laws or this system, this international system, as if it's a genuine system
mhm,
intended there to be implemented. And that's something that I constantly talk about. We need international law. I think there is a need for international law. I think there is a need for an enforcement of that international law. And I think people need to pay for their crimes, regardless of where they come from, whether it's from Asia or Africa or Europe or the United States, equally. But so long as you have a country with proxies, with the United States and anyone under the influence and sphere of the United States, regardless of who is really controlling the United States, because that's a different debate, really, whether the United States is a country or if it's, a mix of corporations and people with, lots of influence and lots of money and power. They are really dictating what's happening. And I think it was really telling. And I mentioned that many times when the chief prosecutor of the ICC, Karim Khan, spoke about this phone call that he had from a Western leader who he hasn't named, who told him the ICC is not for us. The ICC is not for the West. The ICC is for Africa and for Putin. Basically, it's for everyone else. It's not for us. And the man had threats on his life. He had officially and with no shame, or they weren't even trying to hide it, congressmen signing a letter to him, basically threatening him and his family, banning him from coming in. We know that the United States, it already has, well, what's labeled as the Hague Act from the Bush administration days, because they wanted everyone to get away with murder, basically,
mhm.
the murder that they were planning in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now we are at a stage where, well, Donald Trump is outright against the ICC, threatening with more action against the ICC. Benjamin Netanyahu, a wanted war criminal. And by the way, the cases that went up against Israel, they went after so much, battles. Anyway, there was pressure to not go ahead with it. The fact that
Sure.
they went
Oh,
ahead
yeah.
is like something amazing. But then, of course, Western mainstream media tried to completely avoid it, as in, not report about it as if nothing is happening, as if there is no case, as if Netanyahu is not a wanted war criminal, as if this country is not committing a genocide, which is an even worse part of the crime and the complicity, by the way. There's something very big happening in the form of denial. And I think that is one of the worst breaches of human rights, denying that people are going through a genocide and are suffering from war crimes, denying that there's an infanticide in Gaza, not just a genocide.
Yeah.
20,000 children was reported today. That's the number of fatalities. Fetuses were being killed, pregnant women. 70% of the casualties are women and children. And now Netanyahu is visiting European countries. Just visited Hungary.
Really? I didn't know. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he visited Hungary, that declared that they're going to withdraw from the ICC. I heard a report that he's going to visit Belgium, Brussels, and he's going to actually, they're going to actually, I'm not sure if they're going to withdraw or what are they going to find exactly to take them out of the, fact that they're not going to take action against this man. So, in relation to international law, as much as it's necessary, as much as it's a crucial part of our daily life, by the way, as citizens, because like we talk and we criticize, for example, but I think as populations, we need governance, we need laws, we
Yeah.
need enforcement, because you don't want people to do whatever they feel like. It doesn't work like that. The world simply doesn't operate like that. But for some reason, that is a normal thing if you live in certain countries, most countries really, but all of a sudden, all of it means absolute nothing when it comes to Israel or wars of the United States and countries aligned with the wars of the United States, which is undermining what the international law and these international organizations were established upon. And I believe that's why we are seeing a rise in the BRICS, for example.
Oh yeah.
And the BRICS, in its formation, they're not really portraying themselves to be as an alternative to the United Nations. But I think there's a level of understatement with that because they're just in the process of formation. I think they are growing. I think they will be at a stage if more and more countries join and this BRICS, this coalition of countries grows further to create something that is a genuine or a better alternative, or something that resembles a world order that is more equal and more fair. And simultaneously, we are seeing a decline. We are witnessing the end of the empire, really, and we are witnessing an establishment and a formation of a multipolar world. And I think, many people, when they get sucked into if we want to take, for example, Gaza, although we've had problems with Sudan, problems all across the world, really, uh, I think some people fail to realize or look at it from an overall perspective that once you have these significant historical changes that are taking place and that are about to happen in the future, because sometimes certain things we see things that we don't understand in our daily life, but they will be meaning very much in the future. And
Mm-hmm.
people don't realize that is part of the bigger plan, and that things are inevitably changing. And historically, empires, when they were on their way down, they were the most brutal.
Yeah.
Like if we want to talk about Israel now, for example, you're seeing how brutal they are because of how bad they're doing internally. When you internally have people starting to lose faith in that idea, in that concept, that's the biggest problem. And like from an Israeli perspective, by the way, and their current serving defense minister mentioned that actually. He said that the public opinion in the United States is at a level of an existential threat to us.
That's what
So
that's
they
what we
view,
want. That's what we want. That's what I'm trying to achieve
yeah,
with my books, and hope. And you
mm,
know, if Americans, there's someone wrote a book a long time ago. You may know it. It's called, the title was "If Americans Only Knew." I don't know if you're aware of that
mm,
book. And it was written, I think, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And Americans, just for people that are listening that may not be in the United States and don't know, the average American has no idea what's going on. We are the most propagandized country, only
mm,
second to North Korea. We're clueless. Oh, really? I mean, we got ABC,
mm,
CBS, NBC, CNN,
mm,
and you could watch those things all day and night, and you'll never see a gram of truth, especially about
mm,
Gaza.
mm. Absolutely, no, really. But I think that is slowly changing. I
Oh yeah,
believe. I think there's been a radical change, and I think part of the aggression that's coming from the government in the United States against activists, against people who call out genocide, all of their threats, for example, to students revoking visas and whatever. I think all of that is coming because they know very well how effective the movement is. And I view these as desperate measures. When I see a country starting to work so hard to stop people from talking, to ban flags, to intimidate people for voicing an opposing opinion, regardless of, by the way, how harsh that opinion is, I think that shows you a great failure. I don't think that's a position of strength. Now, they're doing that so that they don't have more internal pressure to go ahead and change their policies. But if the United States administration, if the Trump administration is taking these actions, for example, against students, international students who have been undeniably active, well, what are you going to do with the American, born and bred American, who's changing his
right.
position? Are are you going to take away their citizenship? Are you going to tell them you're not an American? Why? Because they don't necessarily follow your view, your opinion. And again, that takes us to a different subject. Is there free speech? And what are the limits of free speech? Is it only free speech if you, for example, want to mock a certain, for example, religion or religious figures, or deny the existence of God, for example, if we
Right.
want to talk about it from a religious perspective? And of course, people are totally entitled to voice their opinions at the end of the day, so long as they are not intentionally trying to hurt other people, if that makes sense. But then again, there's another argument to do with that too. But are we free to say whatever we want and come up with even new facts that defy science in many cases? And we are not entitled to call a spade when it comes to Israel? And why is that? And why are we not questioning things to do with World War II even? And I think that's a very important subject. To this day, children are taught everything about World War II as it is from the narrative of, well, mostly the Western world. No, not not factually based, not going back to the history and what happened exactly. And that has to change.
Can I share something with you? They don't even get told the Western history. And I learned this from an Oxford
Mm,
trained historian who's taught at Oxford. During World War II, the French were supporting the Zionists to cause problems for the British. During World War,
mm,
they were arming them, they were training them, they were giving them support. So they don't even, not only are they not learning history of other parts of the country, they're not even learning the most basic history about all the infighting between the French and the English that went on in Palestine. Because the
mm,
the English were interfering with the French wanted to control Lebanon, of course, and the English had their position in Palestine, and so the English were interfering with the French in Lebanon, and so the French fought back by arming the Zionists, and what boggles my mind, and especially in the UK, the Zionists were murdering British officials.
Totally.
I mean, and not just some random madman doing something crazy. We're talking about organized gangs killing high-ranking political figures, killing policemen.
Absolutely.
Oh, I mean, how could this be?
That's why they used to exactly, and that's why what was labeled as the British Mandate at the time used to describe many of them as terrorist organizations officially. But then again, there's another argument that the troops on the ground did not really know the bigger plans. But from the abhorrent establishment position, it is absolutely shameful for the British who sacrificed with their lives. And by the way, if you speak to someone who lived through that period, they will tell you exactly what they think about Israel and about Zionists, because they faced them hands-on and they faced their terror directly. But the establishment has no shame to a level where the previous Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, went to the David Hotel that was established on the same building that they bombed in, I think it was in 1947, with over 90 casualties. Over a couple of dozen of them were British armed forces and multinationals too, again disguised as Arabs. They were pretending to be Arabs, wanting to, but they have no shame whatsoever. And it's as if they proudly, support this enterprise for so many reasons, from what they consider to be so many reasons, whether it's, the state that is considered to be, the red line, and then they are withdrawing all of these fake chains around criticizing this entity to protect it that much because it means so much for the United States and the Western colonialist position in that area. It's at the end of the day, it is a colonialist entity. But again, to what extent are you gonna continue to deny what's happening on the ground? And this is where I believe we are reaching a point of no return, and it's getting us to a point where we will witness probably the darkest things, and maybe things that are even worse than we have seen before, before a transformation happens. And again, it can't last forever. At the end of the day, it can't last forever. Ken, is there anything you would like to wrap up our podcast with? We've spoken about so many interesting subjects.
I love it. Thank you for providing me a place to share these ideas.
Pleasure to have you.
You mentioned the BRIC countries, and I want to share something with people that in terms of gross domestic national product or whatever that thing is, the non-BRIC countries look better on paper. But if you actually look at who has the people, who has the manufacturing capacity, because remember, the US doesn't make anything anymore, Britain doesn't make anything anymore, who has the actual natural resources in the ground, the BRIC countries right now, today, without any further growth, outpace the non-BRIC countries. So that's something to think about. The other thing, and I'm probably going to get into trouble. Some censor's going to listen to this, but what the hell? The people in Yemen who are courageous and honorable beyond words are showing that maybe it's not going to be such an easy fight if the US and the UK and all these other countries decide that they're going to intervene in a very forceful military way, because the technology has changed. And then we have this other element, which we haven't talked about. We could probably spend all day talking about it, which is the faith of people in what's right and the willingness to do whatever has to be done for the right thing to happen. And I think if we're comparing, you have crooks on this side and pirates on this side, And in my opinion, yeah, I mean, that's what they are. England's always been run by pirates. If you do the history, that's how they've always made their money. They were either literal pirates stealing from the Spanish, or they were running slaves, or they were running opium to China, or they were enslaving their own people in these horrible factories. You know, where do you think all those big estates came from, right? But I don't know. I just lost my point. But in any event, if you have the morals of piracy on this side, and then you have faith on this side, faith is going to win. This is my feeling.
I believe so too. Totally agree with you. And what a nice statement to wrap up with. Ken, thank you so much for joining me. It was a wonderful conversation. If we can probably delve into several more hours in further episodes as well. I will share links to all of the books and content of Ken. And please do check his online platform, online website, and his books and publications. And again, thank you so much to all of our viewers for another podcast. I will be doing more of the modcast, of course, with community participation as well, guests from so many backgrounds too. If you have any proposals, direct proposals, feel free to contact me. You have all of the links in the description. And if you would like to come, of course, on my show, we always welcome people sending messages and proposing to come on the modcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will hopefully tune in with you in another episode very soon. Ken, thank you again. And to all of our viewers, thank you so much. And I will see you soon in the next podcast.